stuck, I decided I'll use the foreword to our book, which we mentioned earlier, done by Brookfield, Stephen Brookfield. So just to give you a flavour of his thoughts, because we use Brookfield a lot also in our work, because I think anyone maybe now doing self-study action research would come across Brookfield's 4 lenses for examining your work, you know, that you can look at it through the eyes, through your own eyes, your own perspective, through the eyes of the participants, what was the other one, through colleagues, or critical friends, or constructive friends as they're now called, and through the literature lens. And that looking at your research from those 4 viewpoints gives it more rigour, adds to the validity and rigour of it. So we would be very much, you know, fans, or what I say, of Stephen Brookfield. So we asked him then to do the foreword for the revised edition of our book, and this is what he said in it. I'm sure you'll find a few nuggets in this. Good teachers help students learn. This simple truth frames how those of us who see ourselves as student-centred practitioners do our work. Of course, I've just played a trick on you. As any teacher who is half awake knows only too well, apparently simple truths are incredibly complex in their realisation. To help students learn, you have to research what's going on in students' heads. You need to know what's happening to them, how they're interpreting and comprehending content, how they respond to your learning prompts, how they experience classroom activities, and the struggles they face in homework assignments. This means that every teacher who is serious about helping students learn seriously is by necessity a researcher. Researching how your students experience learning and respond to your teaching cannot fail to reveal the complexity of this reality. You are trying to understand a world in which students' mental frameworks, emotional responses, interpretive frameworks, personalities, histories, and cultural affiliations are constantly bumping in unpredictable ways against content, other students, institutional norms and strictures, and you, the teacher. To think that we can control and predict what's happening in a classroom is a comforting illusion that we subscribe to so as to prevent us being overwhelmed by the chaos we negotiate. Of course, systems of instruction and assessment would have us believe that this chaos does not exist, and that with careful planning we can tame the beast of unpredictability. Enlightenment, rationality, and positivist logic presents the paraphernalia of planned curricula, sequenced instruction, classroom meeting times, and evaluative mechanisms to convince us that learning outcomes can be prescribed and anticipated. But experience quickly teaches us that it's a reassuring fiction to think that we can control what happens in class, predict what and how people will learn, and measure it according to some universal standard. In my first week of teaching in English further education, a racially motivated fist fight broke out in my class. 50 years on, I teach in a US university, and I don't get many fist fights in class, though I've seen them at academic conferences. But every week, I feel like a novice and realise that I have very little control over what's happening in my classroom. From 50 years of classroom research into students' responses to my teaching, I've come to realise that I should not assume that my eyes and ears are good guides to reading classrooms. Over and over, it's become apparent that the most extroverted enthusiasts and complainers provide me with a distorted view of what's going on. As I gather data from quieter students, I often realise that what I thought was universal comprehension or resistance is actually very segmented. I've lost the early belief that everything important or consequential in a classroom invariably depends on me, the teacher. I've realised that much student resistance to learning has nothing to do with me personally, but is socially, politically, culturally, and racially sculpted. The more I study my students' responses to the learning I'm trying to supervise, the greater the complexity I uncover. Researching my classrooms for 5 decades has left me in a state of productive ignorance. I am very aware that I have only the most tenuous grasp of what's going on in students' heads. I've learned that what I think are the unequivocal instructions I'm giving are interpreted in multiple and complex ways by students. And it's clear to me that the world of student-to-student interactions is almost completely closed to me. These realizations have had the effect of taking a great deal of weight and unnecessary responsibility off my shoulders. I used to think that whether people were learning anything or whether or not the class went well was all down to me. I don't want to pretend that my presence isn't significant, but there's a hell of a lot more going on than I was aware of. To a perfectionist and control freak like myself, knowing that I can't control everything is liberating. It's also quite amusing to think how much importance I used to grant to myself. I suspect that many of us live at this point of comic dissonance. We act as if everything depends on us, and systems evaluate our performance as if that were true. Yet in our hearts, we know that learning is basically unpredictable, ambiguous, and chaotic. Yet we work in systems premised on opposite assumptions. We administer standardized tests to our students as if they learn the same way and at the same pace. We have our own performance measured by rubrics of effective teaching, as if our complex mental, psychic, and emotional interactions with students can be compressed into 15 or 20 abstract and decontextualized behaviors, communicates expectations effectively, answers questions clearly, covers content comprehensively. The institution condenses learning into preordained blocks of instructional time on the specious assumption that every Tuesday and Thursday between 10:40 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. students are simultaneously primed to learn about photosynthesis or Dante. When you think about it, it's a bit like living in a madhouse or participating in a giant hoax. Everyone knows the reality we're inhabiting is chaotic and uncontrollable, yet we go through planning meetings, participate in task forces, and construct sets of best practices as if we're doing something orderly and predictable. What a strange way to spend a career. How do we survive this comic dissonance? In this book you have 4 experienced and skilled teachers exploring how to negotiate the shifting reality of classroom events. At the centre of their analysis is the importance of constantly researching the context in which we work. Over time, doing this research helps us to become more attuned to different situations and better able to distinguish when our assumptions and interpretive perspectives can be trusted and when they should be held in check. Studying how students respond to our actions makes it easier to respond to crises and unexpected events which informed actions. Ones that are based on valid evidence and have a good chance of having the effects we intend. Researching our practice also means we are better able to develop a core set of values that centres us as we are buffeted by the winds of educational reforms or mandated practices. Experience is a great teacher, and over time we get better at recognising cues in situations that seem very dissimilar. For example, we know that students typically look for a blend of credibility and authenticity in their instructors. They want them to know their stuff and to be able to communicate their knowledge and skill effectively. But they also want to trust them and to feel as learners that they are being treated fairly. But exactly how credibility and authenticity are demonstrated alters fundamentally depending on context. Only if you keep researching the context in which you practice can you develop the skill to know which instincts to trust, which cues to take seriously. So let the authors act as mentors to you on your journey into reflective practice. They write in a wonderfully conversational tone about the questions that are essential to our development and that we will ponder throughout our career. How do we remain confident while feeling like a fraud? How can we learn from the inevitable mistakes that we will make throughout our career? What does it mean to teach different students in different contexts while still feeling that you remain authentically true to your sense of who you really are? How do you go about conducting research and use the information you gather to make good choices? And maybe most importantly, how does research keep you from burning out? How does it inculcate a healthy sense of perspective? After reading their responses to these and other questions, you'll feel you have been in an important conversation with wise friends who remain in touch with the emotional as well as the technical lives of teachers. So that's it. I think plenty of food for thought there, isn't there? And plenty of things we could agree with and that make sense, that resonate with us.
You know, it's so different hearing it as
Is
opposed to
it?
reading it.
Right.
I saw more in it that time now.
Right, yeah.
Actually, when I read